Hello, my name is Luella Hyde. I'm so glad to be with you today. We're going to be talking about primary sources in primary grades. I teach second grade, and so this is something that I've been really excited about learning about because it's going to make me a better social studies teacher when I get to do this with my kids. So I'm really excited about this. So let's get started. So today with the agenda, what we're going to look at is kind of what the definition of a primary source really is with some examples. We're going to do a little bit of testing your knowledge and see what you know. And then we're also going to look at some example lessons of using primary sources in your classroom and offering up some valuable, really cool websites that can assist you with your lesson planning and then the closing. So right now, to think about really what is a primary source? Well, a primary source provides firsthand knowledge of an event or a time period, and they're really considered very authoritative if it is that firsthand account. It represents original thinking, original reporting of the original event. And here there are some examples of some primary sources: letters, diaries, court records, clothing, maps, newspaper articles, anything that's authentic from that time frame would be an example of a primary source. And here you see some examples. There's a newspaper article, letter, photograph, a certificate of marriage, a map. Any of those things are primary sources and can be used in your classroom to generate questions or thinking about that time period. So here we're going to take a second and just kind of play around and maybe check your knowledge of what you might think a primary source is or what a primary source isn't. So which one of these four is not a primary source? Would not be a primary source. So we've got an interview with a Holocaust survivor. That's number one. Number two, a book review over the life of George Washington. Number three, an article of clothing from World War II. Number four, a newspaper article from the day that President Kennedy was shot. So the answer here, I'll give you a second of think time as I would my second graders, but the answer here would be number two, a book review over the life of George Washington. That is not a firsthand account. It has other people's opinions and thoughts and thinking, and so that would not be evidence of a primary source. So take a look at the images here and which one of these would not be a primary source. Number one, documentaries. There's documentaries, you know, I love to watch those myself. They're everywhere. Number two, the beginning first few words of the Constitution. Number three, a map. And number four, a diary. This one I kind of felt like was a little easy, but you probably would agree that number one, the documentary, is not an example of a primary source because that is not a firsthand account. That is not an authentic, anything authentic, and everything else you see here is pretty authentic documentation to be used as a primary source. So here we're going to kind of get into maybe some lesson planning, something maybe you could use in your classroom. But this might be a picture, a photograph that I would use with my second graders. I would probably show this to them, let them have a little bit of study time over that, just really thinking about it, thinking about what they notice and what they wonder. And after those few minutes of think time, that they had that little bit of think time, then I would probably pose some questions to them. What are you noticing? What are you wondering? A good way to do that would be using a Kwl chart. You know, what do you know? What do you see? Maybe what do you wonder? What are you wondering about? What questions do you have? The W there, you know, what do you want to know? And so with that thinking, I would, you know, ask my students, you know, what do you notice about the picture? In my classroom, we use thinking strategies a lot. So I would try to tell them to think about activating their schema. What do they already know? What can they infer by looking at the picture? And then I would also, have them look at it in terms of questioning. What do you wonder about? What are you unsure of? And the questions that you would like answered. And then at the end, when we talk about what we had learned, we would synthesize that thinking and kind of put all of that together. What have we learned about a primary source? I would create an anchor chart with my boys and girls with that thinking. And on part of the anchor chart, half of it, I would write, what do I notice about this photograph? What do I wonder about this photograph? And as I was planning this, I was thinking, okay, what might my second graders say that they noticed? Probably they would tell me that they noticed this photograph was black and white, that they noticed that the people that are standing in the water, that there are people standing in the water, I'm sorry, and probably that they noticed the picture looks like it's from a long time ago. That's something that my second graders would be very interested in, that it looks like it's from a long time ago, black and white, not something very current or recent. They would probably also say that they noticed that that they wondered, they're wondering where the picture, where these people are, probably wondering what these people are doing, wondering probably if there's any snakes in the water. I'm hoping that maybe some of them know that this might be, a baptismal scene, a baptizing, but not sure if they would or not. But I know these are some things that they would probably wonder about. So this would be part of the lesson that I would use, just trying to cultivate their thinking and inquiring about this primary source. Something else that would be good to use as a primary source in your classroom is to maybe get some critical thinking going on and analyzing these two versions of this primary source, our flag, and our current flag, and then our flag from a long time ago. So I would probably launch a think aloud here with these two versions of this flag, and just really pose some questioning of, why do you think the first one is the way it is? Why did it change? What made it change? What's different about them? Why are they different? Just a lot of inquiry of how we could really dive in and figure out the difference between these two and why are they different. So that's just a version of photographs. Another way that we could use a primary source. My students always love learning about the Underground Railroad. So you could give your students, and this is what I would do with my students, several different maps of several different paths used to escape to freedom on the Underground Railroad, and let them really compare the paths. This one goes through these states, this one goes through these other states, and these are the paths that I use, these are the paths that we took, and see if it gets you to the same location of freedom somewhere in the United States. But I would have my boys and girls, pre-COVID, they would be on the floor just really hashing out these different paths. But that's using a primary source, and it's getting the kids really involved and loving learning through that primary source. Another way to use a primary source is we have lots of written documentation that is really good to use as a primary source. But if you're like me and you teach second grade, maybe even first grade, it's kind of hard to give a whole huge document to younger kids. Even fifth grade students, it would be difficult to give a large document. So one way to do it with this Declaration of Independence is you can kind of break it up into parts. So during that breakdown, the breakdown steps of this document, but you would just maybe pose a paragraph or two to your students rather than reading the whole lengthy text. Students can ask themselves, who created this primary source? Where did it come from? When was it created? Why was it created? What was its purpose? You can reread the text to summarize, and even if there's some wording in there, some vocabulary that's unclear, that's hard for the students to understand, still encourage them to go back and reread and do some thinking there. students can ask themselves about the powerful words that maybe are repeated over and over again, or that they know are powerful. Um, you know, and then maybe focus on those. Um, and then students can think about what questions they still have. I know in what I just had shown, the word liberty is there. And I thought to myself as I was planning this and thinking, you know, I wonder if they would think about that liberty and freedom mean the same thing. So just taking a small portion of a paragraph of something, of a document that's just super important yet super long, can be a whole lesson in itself of looking at a primary source. So I would probably extend my lesson, you know, I would probably ask students to go home and talk to parents and grandparents and maybe bring in some actual primary sources, some clothing or just anything at home that was an actual artifact, talking to their parents. Like I said, pre-COVID, I would love to have parents and grandparents come in maybe and talk as a primary source about something historical that they've experienced. I always play the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King around his birthday, and I do that. Students love to hear his voice, um, and actually they can actually feel like they were there and that they're a part of it. Old newspapers that focus on dates or actual accounts, just anything that you can think of that they can have that personal connection with. I would probably do an anchor chart similar to the one that you see here of really the firsthand account of what a primary source is, and some things that would maybe be misconceptions that primary sources are not. That would help them maybe make those connections of, okay, this really isn't a firsthand account. And last but probably most importantly, I would like to share some websites with you. As researching for this, I found some wonderful ways that you can use some of these websites within your classroom. Okay, this very first one that I came across, it is from the National Archives, and it is just absolutely wonderful. On this side, this is more geared toward the younger students, more novice students, but these have actual documents for analysis to use, worksheets and different ways that you could use this. This side is more for the intermediate or the secondary students. But here, this is a PDF. You can print this off. Wonderful. But it's how you would take a photo of a photograph and actually break it down. Okay, what do you see? Is the photo black and white or is it color? Is there a caption? If so, what does the caption tell you? But this is something you could actually print off and use in your classroom using a primary source. There's all kinds of things that you can also print off from here on this side for the younger students. On this side for the older students, I pulled this up and I thought this was really cool. If it's a written document, so then the students, okay, they're going to mark it off. Is it a letter? Is it a report? Is it a speech? Is it an advertisement? Who wrote it? Who read it? Who received it? Just all these things, it just breaks it down and it just keeps their thinking going and going so that they're accountable for that written document and they're really diving in and finding all they can about it. This last portion right here. What did you find out about this document that you might not have learned anywhere else? I loved that. That was my very favorite part. So this is from the National Archives. The second one that I found that I thought was just absolutely wonderful came from the Library of Congress. And this has actual primary source sets. And within the set, you have lesson plans, you have written accounts, you have all kinds of things. The one on Abraham Lincoln was the one that caught my eye to begin with. There's all kinds of documents here, things, that diagram of the federal government and the American Union here. There's documentation between President Lincoln and Mary Todd. There's just all kinds of primary sources here that are just absolutely wonderful that can be pulled up and looked at. And then, like I said, primary source, here's other things, and the sets that you can use, lesson plans, it's just chock full of primary sources and ideas and lessons, and it's just amazing. And that is from the Library of Congress. This next one here comes from the Smithsonian Institute, and it was really wonderful as well. And it's engaging students in primary sources is what it's called. It's got your table of contents. What I liked about this is this is geared toward your upper level students. Probably your 5th grade, 4th grade students would benefit from this. Has the multiple intelligences on here and how to maybe gear your lessons toward those students. But this is just chock full of ways to use Introduction to Documents as a primary source. And then it goes on after documents. There's something that you can pull off that the boys and girls can work with. And then after documents, it goes into, sorry, there's another analysis activity. Just all kinds of things. It's just amazing. Then it goes into photographs. And this is about 64 pages. About 64 pages, and you could print this off, you could use it online, whatever you wanted to do. But it's 64 pages, and it is just amazing, amazing. The last one that I wanted to show you comes from mountvernon.org, and this, of course, is President Washington's home in Virginia, and it is just wonderful too because it has all kinds of different things that you can actually look at. So here's a museum collection of online primary sources, and you can look at some things that were actually part of President Washington's life. Click on these things, actually look at these tangible items, these artifacts, clothing, weapons, all kinds of different things. Or you can go to the documentation, which I thought was super neat. I enjoyed, I think I've already scrolled down, I'm sorry. But there was a letter between he and Martha that I read and looked at. But right now, I'll just click on his farewell address in 1776, page not found. Sorry about that. That happens sometimes. Technology works wonderfully when we want it to sometimes, and then sometimes it doesn't. But here's Martha Washington's obituary. I did click on that earlier. And so here is her obituary, and that would be a wonderful primary source to share with the boys and girls and talk about what an obituary is. There's another big vocabulary word that I'm sure that some of them, I know my 2nd graders probably would not know what that was. So, as we begin to think about closing this today, just don't be afraid, because I know I was when I started thinking about this. I thought, man, there's no way I could use this with 2nd graders. Yes, there is. There's a lot of good ways I could use this with my 2nd graders. There's a lot of good things you could do with kindergarten, 1st grade, and on up to 5th grade. Don't be afraid to do this, but just really realize and make the boys and girls realize that it's just from an actual person that was present, had to be there during that time to tell their story, to tell their thinking of what happened because they know they were there. A tangible artifact from a time period. There's so many ways to use primary sources within the classroom K-5 setting. So many creative ways. You just have to go out there and find them, and I'm hoping that maybe I found several that you can use. But using these in your classroom makes that historical perspective just come alive for the kids and truly, truly engages their thinking. So thank you for being with us today. I hope there was something that you could use in your classroom for primary sources. Hope you have a good evening.